Colston Surfboard Repairs, Lewis speaking. Oh hey man, I've just dinged me board, I just want to know where I can drop it off.
Got Alex Cruz Foxtail, glass job for a friend, 6-ounce bottom, 6/4 deck, thin patch inserts and reinforcements on all the tips, nose, tail and in between the swallow. So first up, got to route the plugs. This one's just a twin, so it's a little bit easier. Don't have to touch that stringer. So when I put the future plugs in, I definitely take a lot of time with this. Any air bubbles you see in there, you want to get rid of them. Just looks terrible by the end. So you've routed your plugs to depth. Pour your laminating resin in there. Get it all as even as possible. And then have your fins in your jigs set and ready to push in. This takes a little bit of work, so you just go with it. Make sure you keep checking your angles, however much angle you want it on. Clean it up as you go. You don't want big blobs. Extra resin around there is fine, but you don't want big blobs that are going to affect the glass job when you're ready to do it.
Here's how I believe plugs should be set in before glassing, or for repairs as well. Base of the route before the plug in, saturated in resin, then pushed in, and your resin should ooze through the grooves, ooze out the side, not too messy, and you should be able to clean it up quite easily with a squeegee or a brush. That way the plug's set in there solid even before glassing. As you can see, the resin's coming out the side. It's nice and clean around the edges, just below, and then the glass we're going to put on the bottom of this board is going to hold it in even stronger. This is how I think they should be done for strength, and I believe they'll last a little bit longer. They can definitely still break out, but they should be in there extremely solid.
Now that's all dry, removed our jigs. I'm going to go ahead and pull our 6-ounce cloth for the bottom. Get it all set up. Cut out. Make sure we've got any crinkles out before we start. I like to do pretty solid laps. Our friend's a bit of a big unit, so the bigger the laps, pretty much the stronger the board's going to be. Might be slightly stiffer, but definitely going to be strong. So we've gone ahead and poured our resin. This is just standard laminating resin. I'll go ahead and squeegee pretty gently, get all the resin on the flat of the board, and then you can let the reason I do it gently is so you can kind of let it soak in before you go over the top with more pressure, and then squeeze out all those air bubbles. This next bit I do, go over, pull out any excess resin onto your rails and then wet out your laps. I find this way a little bit easier because I always used to struggle with dry laps when you run out of resin or you didn't use it correctly. Once you've got it all flat and you're happy with the bottom, then go ahead and start wrapping bottom section and then towards the nose, and then wrap your tail, however you want to do it. Everyone's got their different method. As long as it's wrapped, there's no air bubbles and it's nice and tight, you shouldn't have an issue later on or any time. Always keep an eye out for little bubbles and air pockets. Go over, constantly check the board, especially the fin plugs. I spend a bit of time on the plugs because I think it looks a lot better and there's no air bubbles or pockets. It looks great in the rack, and customer should be a lot happier not having air in his plugs. Go around, double check the board, make sure it's all perfect. The last thing you want is get to the end and you've got a huge dry spot coming around your rails. Spend the time now, get it all nice. You shouldn't have any issues. Forgot to take a video, but we use filler resin on the laps, grind them down nice and flat. Now we're onto the top. We've pulled our 6 ounce and our 4 ounce, cut it out. Now we're laminating. I tried a different technique on this one. Pour the resin down the middle first and then pull it all out towards your rails. Keeps your rails nice and wet. I find you don't waste as much resin as you do with a waterfall. But I must admit the waterfall technique is pretty good. But you do waste a lot of extra resin that you might not have had to. Pull everything tight. Work around your edges. Make sure you don't have any dry spots. And keep it nice and clean. Keep an eye on them tails for any air bubbles or your glass lifting back up. Make sure you get them down so the tail stays strong. With the deck, I went over with a little cheater coat. It's a bit of extra laminating resin to set off a little bit quicker than your normal glass. I find that this helps filling in any pinholes, any dry spots you might have missed, and it possibly might make the board a little bit heavier, but I do think that it comes out a lot stronger and a lot cleaner, which is pretty much what you want. You want your boards to last. You don't want them to last 2 surfs and then fall apart. See all your laps. So after my glass job, I went ahead and filler coated the whole board. I then used 50 grit sandpaper and sand back the whole board as if I was finished sanding it, and then I do a final finish coat. In between that process, I put reinforced patches on the nose and the tail and in between the swallow. These kind of seem to be the areas that always chip. It's better off spending some time, your board will last longer. Here you've got your final finish coat, which is what I lay on top of my 150 grit sandback. As you can see, it sits pretty flat. You've got no lumps, no bumps. You shouldn't hit any weave when you finish sand because it's all been taken care of. You might hit a tiny bit on your tail or your nose tip, but that's just, the sander has to be careful. That's the same with any board, doesn't matter how you do it. Here we've got the board, filler coated bottom and top, hard edges done, ready for sanding.
Filler coat, ready to sand. The hard pad first, get all the edges down, and then we'll get the soft pad. Go over at 180, 240.
So here we go, ready to go with the hard pad. I think it's actually a medium pad with the 180, and I just take down all the edges to get them nice and flat rather than use the soft pad. You might end up with bumps and lumps and you might end up sanding through. Around all the tail and then the whole board. This makes everything easier to sand with the soft pad and the 180. The reason I'm using the 180 is because I've already grinded everything back with the 150 before the final finish coat. So everything's sitting pretty flat and ready to go. So here we've got the 180 grit on the soft pad. Because my filler coat was pretty good, I don't have to pass over the board that many times. I think I went over maybe 4 times each side. In straight lines, and it come out flat. I flipped to the top. I found it easier to avoid sand throughs on the rails. I now go over with the block and the 180 grit, scuff down all my rails and get them all nice. Rather than use the sander, if you do nick something, you sand straight through the rail and you've got weave coming through and it just doesn't look as good with the finished board. This does take a bit of extra time, but I feel like it's a lot better. It's a lot cleaner as well. Once the 180's done, now we've got the 240 on the soft pad. Same again. I think the 240 I worked a little bit more. I did about 8 passes on each side. Trying to hit every spot to take out those 180 marks, turn them into 240 marks. Get ready for the Orbi. So now I've got 240 grit on the hard pad on the Orbi. And I just work my way up and down, keep all my passes nice and even. Same weight, weight or pressure put down, and get it all nice. You're basically replacing all your swirl marks from your sander with Orbi marks, which is how we're going to finish the board anyway. I feel like this leaves a great finish. That looks a lot better. So now we're on to 240 with the soft pad on the Orbi. This gets in any grooves. I feel like it comes out super clean. This soft pad, you can work it on the rails more rather than hand sand because the pad's soft. You still have to be careful, but it works really good. Once we're finished with the 240, this is then 400 wet rub with a soft pad on the orbital as well. This doesn't come up shiny, still slightly dull, more of a matte finish, but all my swirls are going the same way. It's nice and perfect. It's a smooth, consistent finish, which is basically what you want. You don't want scratch marks going left, right and centre. It just doesn't look good in a shop or on a board. And here's your end result. 6/8 foxtail with inserts from Alex Cruz. Thanks for watching.